Good evening, everyone. My name is Janet McNeil, and I have the privilege of being president of Indianapolis Classical Schools. For those of you who don't read the small print in the Indy Star, we did form the Indianapolis Classical School Network, and of course, it is with Herron High School and Riverside High School. But welcome, and thank you so much for coming. What a great turnout. For many of you, this may be your first time on our campus, and we're delighted that you're here. And we invite you back anytime. If you'd like to sit in on some classes and see Socratic dialogue at its best, you need to visit Mr. Pappas's class. He's right back there. I want to thank and acknowledge Doug Wilson and the Wilson Family Fund for having the vision for this event and for choosing Herron High School as its location. I also want to recognize Joanna Taft. Joanna is the founding board member of Herron High School and now Indianapolis Classical Schools. It was her vision that inspired our classical liberal arts model, and it was her vision to create a high school on this historic campus. Thank you, Joanna. Thank you also to the Trinity Forum and Edge Mentoring for their partnerships. I hope it's just the beginning. This evening's purpose aligns with our own mission here. Our mission is to prepare our students to become world-class citizens. We want them to engage in their community and work to make their city better. We want them to live lives of critical inquiry and to evaluate ideas and their own lives through the lens of truth, beauty, and goodness. Also, closely tied to our mission is our commitment to honor the legacy of these buildings. Our buildings once housed the John Herron Institute of Art and Design and the Indianapolis Museum of Art. By finding new use for these buildings, we were able to preserve their architectural beauty, and we celebrate their history by having a robust visual arts program. We are thankful that we have an opportunity to instill in our students an appreciation of beauty and history as they spend these 4 important years of their lives learning inside these magnificent buildings. I am pleased to introduce Cherie Harder, president of the Trinity Forum, who will now introduce our esteemed speaker. Welcome, Cherie.
Well, thank you for that introduction, Janet. It's a real pleasure to be here. I just wanted to add my own word of thanks and welcome to all of you. We're so glad that you've joined us for tonight's evening conversation on culture care with Makoto Fujimura. We're excited that each of you are here. It has been a sold-out crowd, and we actually had to shut down registration earlier today. So we've just been tremendously encouraged by the interest. I see there are a few hardy souls still standing in the back. There are actually a few chairs right down front. If you have as much boldness as stamina, you can be comfortable for the rest of the evening. So if you had friends who could not make it or who tried to register after we had shut down registration earlier today, fear not. This will be video. There will be a video of it, which we'll be posting on our website at www.ttf.org, and I'm sure it will be on Edge's and Herron's websites as well that you can share with your other friends. This is actually the inaugural event of a partnership that we at the Forum are tremendously excited about, both with Herron High and Janet McNeil and Joanna Taft. Ooh. All right. And with Edge Mentoring and Jeff Neff. So we're just really excited for that. Dave Neff, I'm sorry, and Jeff Simmons at Edge. So we hope that we will be back with other events like this on a semi-annual basis and look forward to being in touch with you about that. I also just wanted to add a word of thanks. Janet very eloquently thanked him, but really he cannot be thanked enough, so we will pile on to Doug Wilson, who is one of our trustees as well as deeply involved with both Edge Mentoring mentoring and with Herron High. Really, if you drew a Venn diagram of tonight's events, Doug Wilson, right in the center. And so. And I'm sure that many of you here are familiar with the extraordinary work of Herron High as well as Edge Mentoring, but may be less familiar with the Trinity Forum. So I wanted to give you just a little bit of background about who we are and what we do and why we're here tonight before introducing Mako. Part of our mission and our joy at the Trinity Forum is to try to work to provide a space and resources for leaders to engage life's greatest questions in the context of faith. And we do this both by publishing readings and other resources which draw upon the classic works of literature and letters and better equip thoughtful leaders and professionals in grappling with those great questions, as well as sponsoring and hosting events such as the one tonight to connect thinking leaders with leading thinkers in engaging those big questions of life, and ultimately coming to better know the author of the answers. We're at a time in which such conversations are both more needed and more rare. Many of the great questions of life pertain to discerning, valuing, cultivating, and spreading that which is true, good, and beautiful, as Janet mentioned, both in our individual lives, but also beyond in our common culture and communities. But caring for our culture is fraught with both confusion and controversy. Over the past several months, what passes for public discourse and dialogue seems to have plummeted to new lows. Television conversations between talking heads generally devolve into food fights. Social media often becomes a long list of misspelled invective. An air of menace often hangs over political gatherings and rallies, and the pluralism that has sustained so much of the American experiment is devalued, even disdained at times, by those who are actually charged with its defense. So at a time when so many of our public conversations are marked by incoherence and anger, can we find ways to talk to each other about the common good in a way that's both accessible and hospitable? Are there ways of caring for and contributing to human flourishing in our common culture that avoids both the belligerence of the culture wars as well as accommodation to or indifference to that which is either pathological or distorted? In his remarkable work, Culture Care, Mako suggests a different approach and a different perspective, that culture is fundamentally not a territory to be seized, but a garden to be cultivated, and that caring for culture requires not a battle plan, but the nourishment of creativity, community, and connection, and ultimately the generation of beauty. It's a fascinating and remarkable vision, and it's hard to imagine a more persuasive or creative advocate than Makoto Fujimura. Mako is an artist, author, speaker, international arts advocate, and cultural catalyst. He is a renowned visual artist whose works are exhibited in galleries all around the world, including the Dillon Gallery in New York, the Sato Museum, the Contemporary Museum of Tokyo, the Belvedere Museum in Vienna, and many others, and is known internationally for his extraordinary mastery of the Japanese art form of Nihonga, which he has adapted and interpreted, as well as the lavish beauty of his paintings, layered with brilliant mineral, pigments, and paints. He is one of the first artists to paint on stage, live at Carnegie Hall, as part of an ongoing collaboration with composer Suzy Abera, and was commissioned by Crossway Publishing to provide the original artwork to commemorate the 400th anniversary of the King James Bible, the first time that a single artist has been commissioned to illuminate all four Gospels in nearly 500 years. He's also the founder of the International Arts Movement, or IAM, an extraordinary organization which connects creative minds around the world, and served for many years on the National Council of the National Endowment for the Arts, was awarded 4 honorary doctorates, was also named last year's recipient of the American Academy of Religion Annual Religion and the Arts Award, an author, a frequent blogger, whose works include Refractions, a journey of faith, art, and culture, as well as his most recent work, Culture Care, which we've invited him to discuss tonight. He is also, I am quite proud to say, a senior fellow of the Trinity Forum. Mako, welcome.
I am so grateful for this opportunity to stand here before you today in a space where not too long ago Joanna invited me to stand in the raw space at Harrison Arts Center and imagine what this place could become. I think the school began at the basement of that. And here we are, some years later. I got to tour the school this morning, and spoke to some of the students here, and it's really remarkable to see this school in existence and to see the students engaged in this journey toward the mystery of knowledge and also the reality that you can only come to know through rigor and hard work, but also with creativity and imagination. I was sitting in the back getting ready, and on the whiteboard was this statement by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Somehow it was written there as a way for perhaps the faculty here, teachers here to focus on their teachings, but I took it to heart, and I want to actually start by reading this. Dr. King is seminal in my thesis for culture care. In fact, I sometimes call culture care the way to carry out Dr. King's dream into the future today. And I invoke his writings often. One chapter is dedicated to him and Mahalia Jackson, who's a jazz singer who stood behind the podium to encourage Dr. King to tell about his dream on that famous day in Washington, D.C. And it was Dr. King who said the ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands in moments of comfort and convenience, but where he stands in times of challenge and controversy. The measure of a man is not where he stands in moments of comfort and convenience, but in times of challenge and controversy. There is a chapter that I'm going to add in Culture Care book in the future editions. And I speak about this metaphor a lot when I talk about my journey as an artist, a journey in such a time as this, in very conflicted public realities where, as Sherry noted, there's just all sorts of things happening that distorts our message and distorts how we speak, as I'm speaking here. See, technology is not what it's cracked up to be. We don't need this. And actually, yeah, I can just project and not use this. But since this is recorded, I will abide by technology as you guys figure this out. And that chapter is on peacemakers. There's a wonderful book by a lawyer named Ken Sande, who wrote a book called The Peacemaker. And in it, I find this very useful in living in such a time as this. He does three categories dealing with people who seek peace. Three types of people, types of approaches. He lists them: peace fakers, peace breakers, and peacemakers. Peace fakers, peace breakers, and peacemakers. If you imagine the eye of the storm, of a hurricane approaching you, there are a group of scientists, I'm told, that are called storm chasers. And they actually risk their lives and ride into the eye of the storm to measure the eye, to take data, so that they can relay that information to make sure that evacuation happens in places that needs to happen. So storm chasers is also a metaphor that I will talk about in this chapter. Now, what's interesting is if you think about cultural realities and effects of cultural wars and how the church has responded to cultural melees, these categories are also helpful and also convicting. Christians, by large, me included, tend to be peace fakers. We would not want to be storm chasers. We would rather avoid a storm altogether, run away, and decide that this is a battle that's not worth fighting. I do that all the time in my life. I don't know about you. I'm a pacifist by nature. But there's another side of me, right? That's an artist. And artists tend to be peace breakers. They're the type of people that want to transgress and ride into the storm. But the problem is, many times in my life and in the lives of other artists that I try to help, that they don't know how powerfully damaging the storm is. So they end up becoming very self-destructive in the process of transgressing against status quo. They ride into the storm saying, yes, this is my thing to do, to shock society, to reveal the truth. So culture care is this. Culture care is helping peace fakers to be storm chasers, to ride into the eye of the storm, to become peacemakers. It's helping peace breakers to transgress even further, break the wall of the eye into the eye of the storm. And if you can do that, you have both, let's say, Christians in this case, and artists in the eye of the storm. That's culture care. And so while it is a garden, it is a moving garden. It is a part of stewardship that you always have to pay attention to where the storm is moving to and move with it. So culture care is to stay in the eye. And for those of us who are Christians, we need to also recognize that this is done in following Jesus Christ, who is literally the eye of the storm. And in that place, we are able to find this ability to stand in challenges and controversies, even in moments when that is tested. The ultimate measure, I believe, is measured in how we can stay with Jesus in the eye of the storm. So this idea, why the art? Why the arts? Why should an artist stand here at a Trinity Forum event intending to work to communicate something about leadership in today's society? Why would you thrust an artist up here? You know, well, part of culture care is also to identify that if you can have artists and rest of us in the eye of the storm. In fact, you notice in that model, the ones that are leading the way are artists. You know, they're riding into the storm, right? They're excited to do it. Their senses come alive in that, and they're trained in their craft to articulate what they're feeding into the world. But they don't go far enough. So this reality of us journeying into the eye is really a role of a leader that is willing to sacrifice for the sake of others. Artists are closer to the eye than the rest of us. So I have found over the years that I need to practice this myself, to trust with faith and hope that the future is created to those who Dr. King is referring to those who are willing to stand. And that measurement is led by this awareness and this reality that artists possess so naturally, which is this natural curiosity, right? We want to ride into the storm because it's amazing and beautiful. We don't often think about how dangerous it is. Annie Dillard, one of my favorite writers, has written a classic book called Pilgrim at Tinker Creek. And she explains this journey well in this book. I recommend it highly for those of you who want to pursue what I'm talking about, looking into this reality of observation, awareness, and wonderment, even transgression into the storm of life. And to discover what it is about artists that qualifies them as leaders. And so she has a chapter in this book, Pilgrim at Tinker Creek, on issues of perception, how we tend to ignore things that artists are so willing to pay attention to. You know, whether you're a musician or visual artist or theater artist, artists, poets are driven to recognize reality with a capital R. We are the ones that notice that the sunlight coming in through the trees, the foliage is beautiful. We are the ones to hear music that no one hears. And she does such a wonderful job of this. I want to read a portion of this just to get us thinking about this reality, role of an artist in this tumultuous time. How would they lead? And she's describing not artists, but just normal people who were born blind. And through modern medical advancement, they were operated on and they can see now. It's what happens that fascinates Annie Dillard. What happens when they are able to see for the first time? And she recounts this one account after another to the extent that I can't read all of it. But she describes one or two cases where I want to share this with you. And she writes this. On one hand, on the one hand, many newly sighted people will speak well of the world and teach us how dull is our own vision. To one patient, a human hand unrecognized is, quote, something bright and then holes, end quote. Shown a bunch of grapes, a boy calls out, quote, it is dark, blue and shiny. It isn't smooth. It has bumps and hollows, end quote. A little girl visits a garden, and she writes, quote, she is greatly astonished and can scarcely be persuaded to answer, stands speechless in front of the tree, which she only names on taking hold of it, and then asks, the tree with the lights in it. Some delight in their sight and give themselves over to the visual world of a patient just after her bandages were removed. Her doctor writes, quote, the first things that attracted her attention were her own hands. She looked at them very closely, moved them repeatedly to and fro, bent and stretched the fingers, and seemed greatly astonished at the sight, end quote. One girl was eager to tell her blind friends that, quote, men do not really look like trees at all, end quote. And astounded to discover that her every visitor had an utterly different face. Finally, a 22-year-old girl was dazzled by the world's brightness and kept her eyes shut for 2 weeks. When at the end of that time she opened her eyes again, she did not recognize any objects, but, quote, the more she now directed her gaze upon everything about her, the more it could be seen how an expression of gratitude and astonishment overspread her features. She repeatedly exclaimed, "Oh God, how beautiful. Oh God, how beautiful." That, in a sense, to me, explains what artists do well. They help us to see the world as if for the first time. When you walk around museums and see paintings by Monet and Van Gogh and contemporary works that challenge how we view reality through technology and installations, video pieces, artists are trying to lead us into that place of discovery and wonderment that we actually frankly lost because we have diluted this sense of being. We are no longer human beings, but we have become human doings. We lost this ability to feel, touch, experience, taste, smell. Our senses are loaded with this explosive capacity. We are fearfully and wonderfully made, Psalmist tells us. But in order to survive, right, you can't sit and watch this old truck running to you and be amazed in wonderment that the afternoon light, the light that is about to go away, is how it's hitting that license plate. And your wife says, "Get out of the way or you're going to be crushed." Artists are not good at survival games. We tend to stay there and watch this truck approach you. This has really happened to me. And I have a chapter about this, how artists tend to be border stalkers. There's a Middle English, Old English word called meastapa that describes Grendel, the dragon in Beowulf. J.R. Tolkien talks about this. And how artists tend to be stalking the borders all the time of experiences, tribal realities, and they move in and out, never really committing to one. But they're the ones that tend to notice new things about the overall reality of all people. And they're the ones that are able to go into other tribes and learn their language and culture and pollinate, bring that back to your own tribe. And I talk about how Tolkien carried this idea into the character of Strider of the Bree, how he is seen in the beginning of the journey in Lord of the Rings as this ranger that's very, hiding in his hoods in the corner. And innkeeper says, "Watch out for this guy, he's dangerous." Well, it took Gandalf to know that this dangerous border stalker ranger was really Aragorn, the king. I see artists like that. They're sitting in the dark corners, hiding, and everybody's afraid of them. But they have this royal blood, priesthood, that's ready to be harnessed, and they have to go through a series of challenges in order for them to, their identity to catch up to who they are. I see them as king of tribal zones that actually, because of this natural nature to stalk the borders and to enter into another place and to be in conversation with other tribes and to learn their language and customs and fall in love with a, is it half elven or quarter elven? I forget which one Aragorn marries into, that separate tribe of the elves. So that is real to me because I've seen this in lives of artists that I have mentored over the years. I've seen them grow into that, to rise above just this, and to take that gift of curiosity and wonderment and ability to capture the storm, to ride into one. It takes courage to do that. Not many of us are willing to do that, but they are, and they can lead the way. Dr. Howard Gardner in Multiple Intelligences, he teaches in the education department at Harvard, wrote a book called Multiple Intelligences, where he recognizes artists as leaders. He says artists are leaders because they're in the business of persuasion. They're in enterprise of persuasion, business of persuading others to consider other viewpoints. And so you can be, if you are an artist of any kind, lead in this journey into human discovery through wonderment, through awareness, paying attention well, and this difficult task of craft that takes years to master, that attunes what you're creating with the heart to make that into, manifest that into form, these paintings, this building. We live in the ecosystem of imagined actions actuated into the world. And we forget how important this is in our lives. We actually swim in them, and they affect us deeply. But we have become consumers rather than makers. And I was recently recommended a book by a friend of mine. She's a friend who I'm mentoring, but it turns out that she's actually mentoring me. And she recommended this book by Elizabeth Gilbert, who wrote Eat, Love, and Pray. A wonderful writer, and her book called Big Magic, Creative Living Beyond Fear, actually makes a point, which I want to close with, and then we can kind of go into Q&A. So I've been talking about how artists are important and how they can be leaders and how they can lead us into the eye of the storm, especially at times like this. Well, it just happens that all of us are artists of some kind. We just forgot about it. And she makes this point. It's a little long, but I'm going to read it to you. She's a wonderful writer, and it takes nuance of a writer to make this reality come true. She's trying to convince you, the readers, that you are indeed a creative artist, full of potential to see the world as artists see, to experience and feel deeply about reality, to actually be the one that can be peacemakers in the eye of the storm. Here's what I'm getting at, dear ones, she writes. You do not need anybody's permission to live a creative life. Maybe you didn't receive this kind of message when you were growing up. Exception is the school. Maybe your parents were terrified of risk in any form. Maybe your parents were obsessive, compulsive rule followers, or maybe they were just too busy being melancholic, depressives, or addicts, or abusers to ever use their imaginations toward creativity. Maybe they were afraid of what the neighbors would say. Maybe your parents weren't makers in the least. Maybe they were pure consumers. Maybe you grew up in an environment where people just sat around watching TV and waiting for stuff to happen to them. Forget about it. It doesn't matter. Look a little further back in your family history. Look at your grandparents. Odds are pretty good they were makers. No, not yet. Keep looking back. Go back further still. Look at your great-grandparents. Look at your ancestors. Look at the ones who were immigrants or slaves or soldiers or farmers or sailors, or the original people who watched the ships arrive with the strangers on board. Go back far enough and you will find people who are not consumers, people who are not sitting around passively waiting for stuff to happen to them. You will find people who spend their lives making things. This is where you come from. This is where we all come from. Human beings have been creative beings for a really long time. Long enough and consistent enough that it appears to be a total natural impulse. To put the story into perspective, consider this fact. The earliest evidence of recognizable human art is 40,000 years old. The earliest evidence of human agriculture, by contrast, is only 10,000 years old. Which means that somewhere in our collective evolutionary story, we decided it was way more important to make attractive, superfluous items than it was to learn how to regularly feed ourselves. The diversity in our creative expression is fantastic. Some of the most enduring and beloved artwork on earth is unmistakably majestic. Some of it makes you want to drop to your knees and weep. Some of it doesn't, though. Some acts of artistic expression might stir and excite you, but bore me to death. Some of the art that people have created across the centuries is absolutely sublime and probably did emerge from the grand sense of seriousness and sacredness, but a lot of it didn't. A lot of it It is just folks messing around for their own diversion, making their pottery a little prettier, or building a nicer chair, or drawing penises, on walls to pass the time. But that's fine too. You want to write a book? Make a song? Direct a movie? Decorate pottery? Learn a dance? Explore a new world? Do it. Who cares? It's your birthright as human beings, so do it with a cheerful heart. I mean, take it seriously for sure, but don't take it too seriously. Let inspiration lead you wherever it wants to lead you. Keep in mind that for most of history, people just made things, and they didn't make such a big freaking deal out of it. And here's what I love. We make things because we like making things. We pursue the interesting in the novel because we like interesting in the novel. And inspiration works with us, it seems, because inspiration likes working us. Because human beings are possessed of something special, something extra, something unnecessarily rich, something that the novelist Marilyn Robinson, one of my faves, calls an overabundance that is magical. That magical overabundance, that is your inherent creativity humming and stirring quietly in its deep reserve. Are you considering becoming a creative person? Too late. You already are one. To even call somebody a creative person is almost laughably redundant. Creativity is the hallmark of our species. We have the senses for it. We have the curiosity for it. We have the opposable thumbs for it. We have the rhythm for it. We have the language and excitement and an intimate connection to divinity for it. If you're alive, you're a creative person. You and I and everyone you know are descendant from tens of thousands of years of makers, decorators, tinkerers, storytellers, dancers, explorers, fiddlers, drummers, builders, growers, problem solvers, and embellishers. These are common ancestors. The guardian of high culture would try to convince you that the arts only belong to a chosen few, but they are wrong, and they are also annoying. We are all the chosen few. We are all makers by design, even if you grew up watching cartoons in a sugar stupor from dawn to dusk. Creativity still lurks within you. Your creativity is way older than we are, way older than any of us. Your very body and your very being are perfectly designed to live in collaboration with inspiration. And inspiration is still trying to find you, the same way that it hunted down our ancestors. All of which is to say, you do not need a permission slip from the principal's office to live a creative life. Or if you do worry about that you need a permission slip, there, I just gave it to you. I just wrote it on the back of an old shopping list. Consider yourself fully accredited. Now go make something. Thank you.
All right, it's time to ride into the eye of the storm for the most dynamic part of the evening, which will be the Q&A. So we've got two microphones, one right here and one in the back. So there's just two rules. We ask for you to keep your questions civil, and secondly, that they would stay in the form of a question. So feel free to start lining up. I'll kick us off. Mako, you, probably many people in this room know about your work advising Martin Scorsese in the film Silence that came out in the past year. And how would you advise someone to stay motivated to continue creating in the midst of suffering, which we will all go through if we haven't already in varying degrees?
Thanks for that. And Martin Scorsese was obsessed with this story written by Shusaku Endo, came out in 1965, called Silence. It's a profoundly difficult book to read, especially if you are a Christian, and because it deals with persecution, Christian persecution of the 17th century. Excuse me. And so I was asked to read the early script. Yeah, this is what happens when there's a lot of flowers in the room, but there's no flowers, they're just ferns. I don't know what's going on. And I had this privilege to be on a set in Taipei twice and work with a set designer to get into the details of that production, which is a remarkable effort. Talk about storm chaser, chasing after truth and information, and a whole set of storm chasers who were there because Marty invited them to make this film, which actually had initially no guarantee that they would get paid. Liam Neeson and Andrew Garfield and Adam Driver and Issei Ogata and all these actors came, and it's a remarkable effort of a master filmmaker who dedicated. He had to fundraise himself. No film company wanted to take this on. It didn't do so well in box office here. But in Japan, in the first 10 days, 300,000 Japanese lined up to see this film. And to this day, it came out in January. Even today, I was checking Japanese Twitter, and there are substantial responses still going on. So it is about suffering, and it is about depicting that it is a storm chaser movie, and you have to ride into the storm of persecution. But it is done with such beauty and haunting awareness. And Andrew Garfield in particular, I think there's very few actors have ever done on a Hollywood screen, which is to disappear from the screen. Critics didn't like that in the West, but I kept on telling people, wait till the Japanese see this. And sure enough, his disappearance act, self-sacrifice, literally from the screen. You don't win Oscars by doing that. But you win hearts of Japanese who know that their true hero is the one who loses everything for the sake of others and continues stoically to live on. Andrew Garfield plays that role magnificently. And so what is suffering? What is, well, the arts show us that. When we struggle, right, in our own lives, and we go through things, and we're wondering ourselves, what if we lose everything? Even our faith is contested by the authorities to purge them out of existence. We are forced to recant. We're forced to lose our identities. We are exiled in a foreign land. What if you completely disappear from the screen of your life, the stage that you thought you had designed? what happens then? And Endo and Martin Scorsese both reveal their biases at the end of their story. Now, in Endo's case, you have to read the novel to the very end. And by the very end, I mean the appendix. Don't miss the appendix. Because that appendix, 3 pages, is what Martin Scorsese spends last 20 minutes of the movie. That's really costly in a 2-hour and 40-minute film. 20 minutes for 3 pages. Why? Because that's their answer. That's their answer to suffering. That's how they would address that question. And so arts are full of these signatures and ways that can lead us into the eye of the storm. And it's very important in education, in public service, to understand that in times when discourses get shorter and shorter into Twitter land, we have examples, right, of writers who wrote into the lengthy and significant, weighty realities, and they can help us navigate this time. So thanks. Yeah. Any other questions I can?
Thank you for presenting this for us. I really appreciate that. Last year, I was involved in a show. My art representative got me into a show at a coffee shop downtown, and thought it was great. Walked in to hang my work on the wall, and looked around and saw some pieces and thought, well, this is really interesting stuff. And then the owner came up and said, well, this is an LGBT Pride Month show. And the gal didn't say anything to me. So my first instinct as a Christian was to kind of back up and say, okay, that's fine. Yeah. And then the girl, the next word out of her mouth says, we don't want any haters here. And that kind of opened the door to me to say, she said, we don't want any haters, because her experience from the culture has been, okay, you're a Christian, you don't like gays and lesbians. And my first instinct after that was that God kind of slapped me across the face and said, tell her about the gospel and how we aren't haters.
Right.
So that was a beautiful moment, and I really kind of struck me that, well, this is really why I'm involved in the Indianapolis arts community, because there are a lot of gays and lesbians in the international arts, or the Indianapolis arts community.
Yes.
But the next thing that struck me is, how are the people at my church going to respond when I tell them I'm showing in a LGBT Pride Month show? So my question to you is, as a Christian artist, maybe for us it isn't the culture that is the eye of the storm. Maybe it's the people in our Christian community that are the eyes of the storm, and how do we deal with them?
Yeah, peacemakers. Okay. Let me just say this. I hate labels. I'm not a Christian artist. Yes, I am a Christian, but it's a noun to me. It's not an adjective. And I have many gay friends, but I don't think of them as gay friends. They're my friends. They have names. They have enormous value to me as friends. That's seriously not the first thing that I think about when I think about them. I love them as human beings. I hope my art and your art speaks beyond those labels. And as border stalkers, we must commit to that, because it's not enough to, have your show inside a pen, your tribal pen, I'm mixing metaphors there, so you have to kind of be very creative here. You imagine sheep inside a pen and tribal boundaries, okay? Jesus does this all the time. He says, I am the gate. Okay, so what does that mean? I am the good shepherd. Okay, what does that mean? Well, in John 10, he's seen to indicate that the reason he came is to take us out of the pen, to go outside. Why? Because the inside there's no nourishment. So you have to go outside to find good grass out there, and sheep can find them. But it's dangerous, right? So there are wolves out there. You can get lost. So he tells the parable of the lost sheep. He will leave one. She will leave 99 behind to find that one. He promises that would be the case. What is he talking about? Well, I think it applies to the situation. We have to, as artists, perhaps we're the ones, we're the teenage sheep jumping over the fence, because our tribal elders told us it's too dangerous out there for you, and we know that there's nourishment out there. Well, now we don't know how to survive out there, but we know we have to go out there, right? So when a good shepherd says, I'm the gate, I will open the gate for you. So your job is to go out there and find grass. You're like, yes, this is what I'm built for. And of course, you're out there and you get lost. And you're in danger and you don't know what to do. And if you have this experience like I have had so many times, Jesus comes. He comes. He is a good shepherd. So I don't doubt that at all. And I don't care if you're gay or Christian or whatever your label is, you need that nourishment. It's because it's not about your labels, it's not about your tribe, it's about being a human being. And I want to be the one that perhaps crazy enough, maybe foolish enough to be out there in the borderlands to discover new kind of nourishment, cultural nourishment for people. And I want to survive so I can go back and tell my friends that, how to get there. And I found, to be honest, that many of my friends who are exiled from society have the capacity to find good things. I follow them there. They have given me nourishment. And I know that it's a nourishment for everyone. It's not just for them. And cultural care is journeying with them sometimes. These people exiled, marginalized, oppressed, rejected by society, rejected by us. And they end up going to a place where there's a strange phenomenon going on in early 90s in Brooklyn that is now we call hip hop. And you are a father, okay, of a son who skateboards every day to Brooklyn to hear these voices, and he comes back and tells you, Dad, there's something going on. And you're worried about him. You don't want him to be lost. So you go with him. You listen to these explicit music. And he teaches you what it means to live in New York City and to hear the sound of the streets bumping up against your soul, and how these immigrants and people who are exiled from society feel and how they express their anger. But many of them are dedicated enough that they will actually go further than being being a peace breaker, and they actually end up at the eye. I see my own son reach there. So I want to learn from him and so many others of his friends that he's introduced me to. And I don't know what the labels are, frankly. But I want all of us, as whether you're people of faith or people struggling in the margins, to realize how valuable that is. And if you're an artist showing in a cafe, go for it and push your art into those margins. Create so you can communicate your true self, not what people say about you, not the image you project. Don't worry about that. Let others worry about that. Our job is to find our voice, stay in it, go out there, find that nourishment, so that we can tell others about it. Yeah, thanks for the question.
Hello, thank you.
Thank you.
I really feel the need to ask this question, kind of in light of the past one. But in taking many art classes myself, as a Christian, as a noun Christian,
Yeah.
I found that so many of my my classmates were talking about sexuality and sex very openly,
Yes.
and it was always very pleasure focused. And yet, in my church background,
Yes.
it was just kind of disdained. It was non-spoken of. I feel like I'm kind of being
Yeah.
a bit of a uncivil question here in asking this,
No,
but
it's fine.
my question is, as Christians, what are specific steps we can take in our craft to work redemptively towards healthy and holy human sexuality?
Yeah, no, thank you. I told these students this afternoon that art is about love. It is about loving the world, loving yourself, loving in the full sense of that word, and love includes eros. I'm sorry if you're offended, but it does. And it's connected. All these love definitions are connected, and it leads to perhaps the greatest of loves, which is agape, and it's sacrificial love. And I think we disservice to ourselves, to our society, to our church, to the gospel, if we do not address eros. And we need to do it in a way that honors God. God is not afraid of sexuality. He gave us sex as a gift. We need to begin to address this because otherwise the world will do that for you. And it's not the way that God designed sexuality. It is based on our pleasure. It is solely self-expression. It diverts and it actually moves away from the true sense of love. And so what is that? Well, it better start early, because the world is not going to wait till you're 21 to address this issue. You have to begin very early on in places like the school. It's very important that we address issues. Don't be a peace faker. And yes, love is a gift, and human sexuality is a gift. Therefore, if we ride into the storm without knowing about the eye of the storm, you will be destroyed. So it's a dangerous game we play. But we have to address it as storm chasers, and we have to bring people, including our children, into that eye of the storm, where God's gift can be fully realized. In whatever the capacity, whether single, married, that human sexuality can be celebrated in our expressions, in our lives, in our communities, in healthy ways. Because if we ignore it, that makes our culture worse, because we're not there to witness for beauty of sex, beauty of human love, and the love of God, which is connected to that, And so it's a delicate topic. I understand that, and many churches and communities have different answers to it that we have to respect. And schools have its own boundaries, and we have to respect that. But wouldn't it be wonderful if human sexuality in a healthy way was captured and celebrated in ways that artists and that music that you hear, that we don't have to segregate them into some corner, that it is fully made alive in all that we do. So that is my hope. It's an ideal, I realize, but that is my hope. Thanks. Yeah. Thanks. Yeah.
I was wondering how your experiences as an artist and as a painter have shaped how you see who God is, and God as the Father, God as Jesus and Holy Spirit.
Yeah, God as an artist, right? My next book is called Theology of Making, and it might take me 5 years to write it, but I will write it. It really is reading the Bible as an artist and assuming that God is an artist too. And I come to believe that God is not only an artist, but God is the artist. God is the maybe only artist. And everything out of God's love flows gratuitously into the world in ways that we can't define. It seems luxurious, excess, extravagant, even useless to us. But as theologians recently, like N.T. Wright and Jürgen Moltmann, has noted, that it is in the gratuity of our lives that we discover God the most. In other words, when we are merciful, when it doesn't make sense to be merciful, when we invite strangers to host them in our homes, when we make beauty, when everybody is trying to survive, when there's little wars going on all around you, there are gunfires, and you play that cello in the midst of it. That's when God shows up, because it doesn't make sense. And God's artistry, his gratuitous excess. Remember that God is self-sufficient. I was told by a friend, don't say this in front of a church. This is not a church, so I can say this, right? God doesn't need you or me. God doesn't need a creation. God is entirely self-sufficient. God doesn't need to do anything. And so why did he create? God created because of love. Because of this excess oozing out of God's character. God just simply wanted to play. And so he created his creatures as creatures of imagination. And he created that excess in us. We're not machines. We're not animals. We're human beings and human becomings. We are creators with imagination. And we've been given that gift to create the future with God. God chose us before beginning of time to somehow invite these creatures that will do the opposite of God wants, but made it possible for us to partake in creation of a new world. I don't know how that works. I don't fully understand, but every time I read the Bible, it opens up to that. Every chapter, every verse speaks of that. So I'm convinced that one of the ways that artists can lead into this is to take seriously this call to spend time, if you're a Christian, immersed in the Word of God, to dwell, behold, to receive. I love that. Eat, love, and pray, right? That's what we're supposed to do with the Word of God. And we don't do that enough as artists. I'm convinced, because I don't do that enough. And we need to, if culture care is ever to happen, it has to be led by people who are doing that on a daily basis, communities that are doing that on a daily basis, and churches that are committed to that, and empowering artists to create and make things because God is a maker. And so to the extent that I say in my book, knowledge cannot be knowledge until you make it into reality. It's not enough to know up here. You have to let that knowledge go right into your heart, the deepest access, deepest realm of your brain. It's not enough to hold on to that. You have to make something with it, because we're makers. And the deepest philosophers call this epistemological base is in our act of making. So, how are we doing? In education, in churches, do we make anything? Or do we just sit and complain, criticize people, and boycott? I'm sorry, but that's not doing what God has called us to. And so I long for a day when there's a school that is dedicated to making, to committed to creating future patrons, future world citizens, future artists, future entrepreneurs, future politicians, future plumbers, future mothers and fathers, whose sole purpose is to make. And we have it right here, don't we? And I'm grateful for that. And so this is a place of making. And that's my work, and I look forward to working with you toward that end. Yes. Last question.
I have a question as far as artists, how do you stay motivated, or how do you find inspiration? Do you move only when you're inspired, or do you try to force that creation?
Yeah. Elizabeth Gilbert has wonderful chapters on this, and she talks about everything from, ideas are like seeds that float in the air and looks for a host. And you actually can say no to it, and ideas kind of say, okay, I'll go to somebody else, But I need to be birthed. I love that idea, because I love that thought, because I find it to be true. I don't wait for inspiration to strike, because I have so many things that I want to do with my work. In fact, I always say successful painting is a work that gives birth to 10 other paintings. And I actually stop painting when it's most pregnant. It's about to give birth. That's the most potent moment, right? And if you're an actor, you want that on stage. If you're a jazz musician, you want that in your sound. And therefore, I've been doing this a while, and I have thousands of paintings that I can't paint. So I give them away. I say, go to somebody else. There are artists out there, that's looking for ideas. Talk to them, because I have to do this series of work that I'm committed to for the next 10 years. Elizabeth Gilbert talks about, having a conversation with your work, and to make it do what you feel it needs to become, to being talked down by it. It's like a tennis match. You're like, your work becomes so alive that you're actually living with it, battling with it, arguing with it, fighting against it. And you can fall in love too with that work. And that allows you literally to be generative. And there is some magic there. I'm discovering in my journey. And I want people that I mentor to enter that space because they can sense that too. They can learn to do that. So at Brem Center for the seminary, I have a studio there, and I have 10 fellows that I have chosen to be part of my work, and they come and go, and part of it is to co-create with them, to talk about all of the things that I talked about. One of them texted me before this and told me he's praying for me, and I'm grateful for that as well. But it's an amazing journey to be able to make and to give that away gratuitously, as God has done for me. So thank you very much. Thank you for this evening. Yes.
Thank you for that, Mako. Mako's book, Culture Care, is going to be for sale tonight after we wrap up just outside for $17. We highly commend that work to you and think you will enjoy it very much. And so wanted to mention that. You can probably also persuade Mako to sign a copy if you purchase it. But I also wanted to tell you about another invitation, which should be on each of your chairs, which is to join the Trinity Forum Society and become part of the community of people who not only make events like this possible, but also think and discuss together ways to open up other forums for leaders to grapple with what matters most, the big questions of life in the context of faith. To do that in community, to do it in a way that is hospitable and accessible and God-honoring in the midst of a cultural moment and a sense of impending dread that is anything but. There are also a bunch of additional benefits to doing that. If you are one of the people who join tonight, the first 15 people who join tonight, we will give you a free autographed copy of Mako's book, Culture Care. So you can avoid the long line by doing that. Invitations should be on your chair. Also, I just want to point out my two terrific colleagues, Alyssa Abraham and Colleen O'Malley, who would be happy to assist you with that as well. It will be right outside the door. There are also other benefits to joining the Trinity Forum Society, including our quarterly readings, where we take the best of literature and letters, provide an introduction explaining its context, relevance, significance, why it matters, and then put discussion questions in the back, so it is essentially a book club in a bag. We have several examples out there, and one in particular that may be of interest. Tolkien's short story, Leaf by Niggle, actually has a foreword written by Makoto Fujimura, so we would commend those to you as well. In addition to that, all members get our monthly podcast series as well as our daily list of recommended readings, which we call What We're Reading, which is a curated feed on thoughtful pieces about arts, culture, faith, and the like that we would commend to you. Anyway, we hope that you will join us in making, not only joining the society, but making events like this possible, not only in Indianapolis, but all over the country. As we move to close out the evening, it is time to, always appropriate to end with thanks, and there are many people to thank who have really labored amazingly behind the scenes to make this happen. First and foremost, I would like to again thank our sponsor, Doug Wilson. This evening is really the product of his own love for the arts, for conversation, for connecting others. It's something that it generated out of who he is, and we are deeply grateful for that, Doug. So thank you. I also want to thank our terrific host sponsors and partners, Herron High School and Janet McNeil, as well as, yes, I agreed. Joanna Taft, the board chairman, Jason Simmons at Herron for all of his help and legwork, and we've had a number of Herron volunteers who have helped with directions and registration, including Robin Knopp, Michelle Melton, Azia Watts, Karen Lalioff, apologies if I mangled that, Julie Scott, Catherine Kidd, and Elvis Myers. Thank you so much for all that you have done to make this evening possible. We also want to thank Edge Mentoring, ably led by Dave Neff, and are delighted that the founder and chairman of the board, Jeff Simmons, is here with us as well. Also, Liz Henderson from Edge, I'm not sure if she's here, but has done an amazing amount behind the scenes, and we're grateful to her. We've also been blessed by the efforts of Tatiana Stieglitz, who's been a volunteer tonight, as well as Jennifer Driscoll, the photographer, my own terrific colleagues, Alyssa Abraham and Colleen O'Malley. And finally, thank you again, Mako, for your remarkable insights. And thank you to each of you for coming, and good night.